Final Earth's message. We tried 3 years of mercy. Now you'll meet the 8 billion wolves of humanity. The room was built, on purpose, to make certain species feel exactly as important as the compact had decided they were. For 31 years, one species had been sitting in that room's outermost arc. The humans, Tier 6, one step above territorial resource. On day 11,315, one of them walked to the center of the floor, and the room stopped working the way it was designed to. My name is Thuvan Oralkaz. I am Yenek Continuance. I have been the record keeper for the Drunnen Compact's deliberative floor for 61 years, and I have watched this chamber do the same thing to the same species in the same sequence for longer than most of the chamber's current occupants have been alive. I am considered decorative, institutional furniture, the sort of presence that gets noted in the seating manifest and then forgotten about until someone needs a secondary signature on a record certification. I have found this useful. The room itself deserves explanation, because the room is not incidental. It was designed. There are notes in the compact's original construction brief, and I have read them, and they are precise about intent in the way that only documents written by people who never expected anyone to read them closely tend to be. The deliberative floor is arranged in concentric arcs. Tier 1 species sit at the center, elevated on a raised platform, the primary resonance zone, where the chamber's acoustic architecture delivers voices at full volume and full clarity. Each tier arc out from center sits lower. By the time you reach the Tier 6 seating, the outermost ring, you are 1.8 meters below the main floor level. There is a step down on the way in. There is a step up on the way out. In front of the Tier 6 arc, there is a curved, transparent panel. Compact engineering specifications describe it as an acoustic integration membrane. It reduces the volume of voices originating from Tier 6 seating by 28 to 31% before they reach the chamber's primary resonance zone. This is, technically, not a silencing device. It is a harmonization system. The distinction appears in the construction brief and has never been amended. I have always thought that was interesting. Not interesting in the way that pleasant things are interesting. Interesting in the way a locked door is interesting, when you notice that the lock faces inward. She picked it up, she signed it, she said nothing. That was the pattern for 31 years, and I watched it every session. Envoy Thesson Breluv, human, Tier 6 delegation lead, arriving at the Tier 6 registry desk at the opening of each deliberative session, picking up the attendance ledger the same way each time, 3 fingers underneath the spine, thumb on the lower right corner, signing in the second column, writing the date in the third, and setting it back down. The ledger is compact standard issue, gray board cover, Tier 6 classification seal stamped into the spine, pages ruled in compact administrative blue. When you sign it, you are confirming your presence and, in the language of compact administrative code, your voluntary acknowledgement of current tier standing. The compact designed this language. I have seen it used 47 times across 11 different species. The lower right corner of Breluv's ledger is worn through to bare board. The gray cover has rubbed smooth in a specific spot from 31 years of the same thumb. This is the wrong detail if you are looking at the ledger and expecting it to be just a ledger. I noticed it in year 4. I wrote it down, I do that. But I am not telling this story in order. I should tell you the part that matters first, because if I give you the 31 years before I give you the moment, you will not understand what the moment cost. And if you do not understand what it cost, you will not understand what it was. If the weight of what you are about to hear has already reached you, good. Stay close. Because the last name on that broadcast, I'll tell you whose it is, but you'll want to hear how it got there. 31 years before that morning, the ledger had a stiff spine and no worn corner. Envoy Breluv received it from the Tier 6 registry clerk on the first day of her posting. She held it the same way, 3 fingers underneath, thumb on the lower right corner, though the spine was still firm enough that the grip wasn't necessary. She signed it, name in the second column, date in the third. She looked at the page for one moment, then she walked to the Tier 6 arc and sat down. That was the day the tier reclassification decree was read into the record. First Adjudicant Vrathkel Dunason, Drunnen, bilateral, 2.3 meters. The exoskeletal ridge plate across his upper thorax, the brushed gray-green of old construction materials. Read the decree himself. He holds the record for longest unbroken tenure as first adjudicant. 44 years at that point, 44 years of continuity, which the compact considers the highest form of governance. His throat sac, the bioluminescent organ below his jaw that brightens when he approves something and dims when he does not, glowed steady, and even throughout the reading, he approved of the decree. The decree stripped humanity's 4 colonial systems of legal personhood, reclassified Earth as a subautonomous territorial resource unit. It assigned humanity to Tier 6 of 7, 1 tier above territorial resource, which is to say 1 tier above object. The compact's rationale, entered into the record, was that humanity's contribution to compact infrastructure consisted primarily of labor and raw materials, and that legal personhood under the compact's graduated sovereignty framework was calibrated to the nature and scale of that contribution. I will translate. You contribute ideas and governance, you are Tier 1. You contribute labor and material, you are Tier 6. The framework had been in place for 80 years at that point. It was not new. What was new was applying it to a species with 4 colonial systems, 8 billion individuals, and a documented history of, and I am reading from my own notes here, which I wrote at the time, because I had a feeling continuing anyway. When the first adjudicant addressed the Tier 6 delegation directly at the close of proceedings and asked whether they acknowledged receipt of the decree, Envoy Brelouve said, "Recorded, 1 word, transmitted on the relay feed that carried the decree to 14,000 systems." Most species analysts in the days that followed interpreted it as formal submission, the standard acknowledgement of a Tier 6 representative with no legal standing to object. In my own record, I wrote 1 word, interesting. My secondary eyelid, a transparent membrane that sits over the primary, did not flush amber. In 61 years of proceedings, it has done that twice. I was saving the second one. I closed my notebook, gathered my materials at the usual pace, and went home by the usual route. I thought about that 1 word for 11 days. The Terran Continuance Bureau's ground office occupied the transit level of Mombasa's second hub, a converted warehouse space with 12 desks, 1 functioning climate unit that cooled approximately 40% of the room, and a cork board on the east wall. The Bureau was officially registered with the Compact as a long-range administrative resilience program. This description was accurate and had never been further investigated. Rithan Voss was making tea. He did this at every meeting without exception, and he was doing it now, standing at the small burner by the window that looked out onto the transit concourse below. The kettle was old. It made a sound like mild protest when the water reached temperature. Nobody had ever replaced it, possibly because the sound had become a kind of meeting bell. When the kettle complained, the meeting was about to start. Envoy Brelouve sat at the head table with both hands flat on the surface. She always did this. Both palms down, fingers spread slightly, the way someone sits when they are prepared to receive information without flinching. I learned later, much later, that her son had taught her this when he was 4 years old. He had told her it made you harder to tip over. She had done it at every meeting since. Nobody in the Bureau had ever asked why. Brelouve was the lead diplomat. Dr. Suvith Arankal sat to her left, systems and legal architecture, the kind of mind that writes in compressed notation only she can read, who had spent 22 years working through the Compact's founding charter instruments the way a careful person works through a structural report, looking for load-bearing elements and stress points. She had found several. She had not told anyone yet. She was still verifying. Commander Petra Ondesvel ran the relay network from a secondary station she had not left in 4 years. She was not in the room in person. She appeared on the small screen at the far end of the table, visible from the shoulders up, and behind her the secondary station's walls showed the specific gray of military-grade shielding. She had grown up in one of the 4 reclassified colonial systems. She still received mail there. She had never mentioned this in a meeting. Ensign Taver Calland was 24. He handled communications and broadcast infrastructure, which meant he spent most of his time managing relay schedules, equipment calibration, and the particular technical frustration of building systems that had to work correctly on a specific future date and not a day before or after. He was the youngest person in the room by 11 years, and he had the look of someone who understood exactly what he had been asked to build and was going to make it work even if he was not entirely sure yet how. When Arethas handled intelligence coordination and the embedded asset network, she knew 214 names. She could not share any of them with anyone in the room. This was not a trust issue. It was structural. The names existed in separate compartments, and mixing them created risk. She had come to terms with this. She sat at the table and listened and occasionally said something short and precise that reoriented the conversation in a direction nobody had been facing. And there was me. Officially, I was not a team member. I met with Rithan Voss once every 4 months in the Compact's public archive on Prathal Station to discuss classification procedures. We had been doing this for 19 years. The archive logs show 47 procedural consultations between a Yenic archivist and a human economic analyst. They are all genuine. We also discussed other things. The cork board on the east wall held a single photograph. It showed Mevin Station's transit hub, the main civilian hub, not the commercial annex, taken from the upper observation deck, about 6 hours before the territorial correction. The hub was at capacity, ordinary, people in transit clothes with transit bags moving in transit patterns. Someone had written the date on the back in black ink, nothing else. Petra Andesvel had brought it on the first day. Her sister was in that photograph, probably. The picture was too small to identify faces at that distance, and nobody had asked. She pinned it to the cork board above the planning table without comment and had never referenced it directly in any meeting in 31 years. New team members, when they joined the bureau, looked at the photograph on their first day. Once. Then they stopped looking. Looking meant asking. Asking meant knowing. Knowing meant carrying it, and you could see the moment each of them decided that they would carry it, but they would not name it because naming it would make it heavier than the work could absorb. No complaint filed, no legal challenge issued, no record of objection in any compact jurisdiction. That was the pattern for the first 15 years. Not because they had given up, because the first 15 years were the foundation, and you do not file complaints while you are laying the foundation. You sign the ledger. You say, recorded. You attend every session without exception. In year 4, the Compact issued a corrective order for the Thelvar Assembly's secondary transit hub. A different case, different species, different zone. Combined dead, 41,000. Breluv attended the formal reading of the order, signed the ledger, said recorded, and left through the Tier 6 exit corridor. She climbed the step up to the general concourse. She did not look back. I noted it. In year 9, a second correction. The Belvari third system, 87,000 dead. Breluv signed the ledger, said recorded, left. In year 14, the third, the Grath Ascendancy's outer stations, which is a different story from a different set of DNA cards in this channel's archive, and if you have not heard it, you may want to. 160,000. Breluv signed the ledger, said recorded. The relay feed carried the acknowledgement to 14,000 systems. 3 weeks after that correction, in a Tier 1 caucus meeting, First Adjudicant Vrathkel Dunnasson remarked that the human delegation was admirably acclimated. The comment was transmitted on an internal compact feed. Win Arethas had a copy within 6 hours. She did not share it with Breluv. There was no need. Breluv already knew she was being read as acclimated. That was the point. The acclamation remark was D1 in Arankal's working file, not data, just confirmation. The data came from somewhere else. The Terran Continuance Bureau's official mandate, Arankal said at the Year 15 review meeting, while Voss poured tea into 6 cups and 1 screen, described the program as long-range administrative resilience planning. The Compact's Tier 6 Oversight Office reviewed it, noted it posed no military threat, and filed it. She paused. Voss handed her a cup. She held it without drinking. They were correct on the second point. Nobody said anything for a moment. The kettle had stopped making its protest sound. Outside, the transit concourse hummed with ordinary movement. Breluv's hands were flat on the table. Continue, she said. The problem with grief, in a professional context, is that it does not stay professional. Brelouv's son was 9 years old when the Grath Ascendancy's first territorial correction reached Mevin Station. His name was Devon. He had taught his mother to put her hands flat on a table when she was about to hear something difficult, because he had noticed it made her shoulders drop, which he had decided meant she was less scared, and he did not want her to be scared. He died at Mevin Station. She has never said his name in a meeting. The photograph on the cork board was taken 6 hours before the correction. He is almost certainly not visible in it. He was 9, and 9-year-olds do not typically stand on observation decks for long, but he was in the station that day, and the photograph was taken 6 hours before. Petra Andesvel knew. She brought the photograph for herself and for Brelouv both, and she pinned it without asking, and it stayed there for 31 years, and neither of them ever said so. This is what DDC3 means when the DNA card says grief is the engine, not the weapon. It is not that the grief made them angry. It is that the grief made them exact, or rather, it had made them precise. Precise in the way that people become precise when the cost of imprecision is something they can name. By year 22, Rithan Voss had completed the first full draft of the economic models. He spread them across the table at the morning meeting, actual paper, because some documents you do not trust to a screen, and the models showed something that the compact had not advertised. The compact's 22 member species were not equal beneficiaries of the tier system. They had never been. The infrastructure financing the compact had structured across the last 3 decades had been built on the assumption that certain absorbed territorial assets were permanently absorbed, meaning the compact had borrowed against them, issued credit instruments backed by them, used them as the collateral foundation for projects that benefited primarily Tier 1 and Tier 2 species. They borrowed against what they took, Voss said. He did not say it dramatically. He said it the way you say a structural finding, flat, factual, slightly tired from the number of times you have run the same calculation to make sure the result holds. That means what they took is now load-bearing. Brelouv looked at the models for a long time. Then she picked up a pen and wrote something in the margin of the first page. She put the pen down and folded her hands flat on the table. Voss never read what she wrote. He told me this years later. He had intended to, he just never did. By year 24, the models were complete. 14 of the compact's 22 member species were economically net negative under the current tier system. Net negative by the compact's own accounting methodology, the methodology that had been in the compact's founding charter for 180 years. Nobody had applied it this way before, not because the math was complicated, but because nobody with access to the full ledgers had been motivated to run it. Rithan Voss had been motivated. By year 27, Arankal had located the 2089 instrument. It was a species standing recognition instrument, a legal framework the compact had co-signed alongside 7 other galactic bodies in the year 2089 and had not referenced in the 140 years since. The instrument was not a challenge to tier classification. It was not a military provision. It was a commercial and procedural document designed to grant legal standing to species that could demonstrate 30 continuous years of good faith participation in compact proceedings. 30 years documented continuous good faith. Arankal showed it to Brelouv on a Tuesday at the Mombasa Bureau over Voss's tea. She had found it in a secondary archive on Prithal Station, in a collection that the compact's own archival staff had reclassified as low-priority historical material in 2103. I know this because I was the one who reclassified it. I had been waiting to see if anyone would come looking. Arankal came looking. We need 30 years, Arankal said. Documented, continuous, good faith participation. Brelouv did not say anything. How many sessions have you attended? Arankal asked. Brelouv looked at the ledger on the table beside her. She had brought it from the deliberative that morning, as she sometimes did, to check her own record. 1,412, she said. At that point, Arankal nodded. We needed 1,342. We passed that in year 26. Brelouv's hands were flat on the table. The ledger, Arankal said. She tapped the gray board cover, The sound was flat, not dramatic. The ledger is Exhibit 1. 4 months before the 31-year mark, I found a procedural manual on the bench in Prithal Station's public archive. It was not mine. I had not left it there. The spine read, Compact Founding Instruments, Secondary Cross-Reference Volume, 2089-2104. I had reclassified this volume as low-priority historical material in 2103. I had shelved it myself. It had been in that archive for 22 years, and in 22 years, only one person had pulled it. I opened the cover. There was a note tucked inside the front board, written on plain paper in Arankal's compressed notation. You have 9 aligned. I have counted 4 more if you want the count. I stood there for a moment. Then I sat down on the bench. I had been watching this story for 31 years. I had been the archivist, the furniture, the institutional background. I had made myself useful in the way that careful people make themselves useful, slowly, quietly, with no footprint that required explaining. The 47 procedural consultations in the archive logs were real. The other conversations were not in any log. This was the first time someone had written me a note. I straightened the volume on the shelf in old reflex, and then I picked up a different one, the one Arankal had left beside it, the one with the filing structure. I read it on the transit back to my quarters, and I did not go home by the usual route. The coalition had been built in parts, the way you build anything that cannot be seen until it is finished. The 3 Belvari co-signatories came first. The Belvari had been net negative under the Compact's own accounting for 60 years, and they knew it, and they had been waiting for someone to find the right instrument. Arankal had found it. She had spent 22 years making sure the instrument was real, checking the language, checking the cross-references, checking the filing requirements. And when she brought it to the Belvari representative, she brought the full analysis, 214 pages with every counterargument pre-answered. The representative read it over 4 days. Then she said, when? The Oveth remnant came through a contact when Arethas had been maintaining for 11 years, a name in a compartment she had never opened in a meeting. She opened it now. The Oveth had lost their 3rd system in a correction 17 years earlier. They had 2.1 billion surviving individuals and no legal standing in any compact jurisdiction. They did not need to be persuaded. They needed to see the instrument. Arethas showed them the instrument. They said yes before she finished the sentence. The 4 net negative species took longer, not because they were uncertain, because they were precise, in the way that people are precise when they have been hurt slowly over a long time, and they do not intend to risk it on something that won't hold. Arankal met with each of them separately, at different stations, over 14 months. She brought the filing structure each time. She showed them where their names appeared in the economic models. She showed them what the Compact's own methodology said they were owed. Each of them asked the same question: what happens if it fails? Arankal gave the same answer each time. The instrument is valid. The record is 31 years long. The filing routes to 11 galactic legal bodies simultaneously. The Compact can challenge the outcome. It cannot challenge the record. None of them asked about warships. That was not the question. Arethas had 8 relay escort vessels in position because you do not leave things to chance. But they did not move. That was the point. They stayed where they were, in standard holding formation, and they did not move, and the record had to be the weapon because if the record was not the weapon, the record was just a record. By year 29, Rithan Voss had completed the 2nd full pass of the economic models. He ran them 3 times. The results did not change. 14 of the Compact's 22-member species were economically net negative under the tier system. Net negative by the Compact's own accounting methodology, the same methodology that had been in the founding charter for 180 years, the same methodology the Compact had used to justify tier classifications for 11 species currently sitting in the outer arcs. Nobody had run it this direction before. The math was not complicated. You just had to want to run it. Voss brought the final models to the Bureau on a Tuesday, same as always. T first. Then he spread the pages. 14, he said, of 22, under their own numbers. Arankal had built the brief. Voss had run the numbers. Arethes had counted the names. The brief was 1,847 pages. Each page corresponded to one session. Each session had a signature. Each signature was dated, witnessed, and transmitted on the compact's own relay network to 14,000 systems. The ledger was Exhibit 1. The brief was everything that came after it. I met with Voss one final time at Prithal Station's archive, 3 weeks before the filing date. He brought tea in a carry container, which I thought was a kind gesture and which I told him was unnecessary, and which I drank all of because the archive had no heating unit. We sat at the long table in the secondary reading room, which was empty. He spread the filing index across the table. The index alone was 40 pages. The routing requirement, I said. I had been thinking about this. The compact will argue that the 2089 instrument requires routing through the primary administrative desk before it reaches the 11 bodies. It does require that, Voss said. The primary administrative desk is controlled by the first adjudicant's office. It is, he said. He poured more tea into his container lid, which he was using as a second cup, for routine submissions. He said it the same way he said structural findings. Flat, slightly tired from the number of times he had verified the same result. Urankal had found the exception clause in year 28. Simultaneous submission to 11 recognized galactic legal bodies bypassed the routing requirement automatically under a provision added in 2091 to prevent any single body from blocking multi-jurisdictional filings. The compact had co-signed that provision. It was in the same volume as the instrument, 2 pages after the instrument, in fact. I had reclassified both documents as low-priority historical material in 2103. I had been waiting a long time to see if anyone would come looking. On the morning of day 11,315, 3 days before the filing date, Taver Calland arrived at Relay Station Gavathul alone. He had been building toward this for 31 years, or rather for 7 years, which was how long he had been on the team, but the infrastructure had been there for 31 years, and he had spent 7 years learning every part of it the way you learn a system you cannot afford to fail on the one day it matters. He knew the relay's carrier frequency. He knew the routing table. He knew the backup routing table. He knew which 3 systems would carry the signal if the primary 3 went down simultaneously, and what the odds of that were, and what he would do if it happened anyway. He ran the broadcast test at 03:58 station time. The relay log showed it, 03:58:14. Test signal, standard carrier wave, same frequency the decree had traveled on when it went out to 14,000 systems 31 years ago. The same infrastructure, the same reach. He sat alone in the relay room for 9 minutes. He said nothing. He did not need to say anything. The test had worked. The relay was armed. The names were loaded, all of them. 4,400 territorial violations documented across 31 years. The names of every system, every station, every settlement, every individual whose name the record could recover, read in order, beginning with the first correction. 9 minutes later, Breluv would walk through the chamber doors. He sat in the relay room and looked at the equipment and did not speak. Outside the station's single porthole, the stars did not move. The relay log blinked. 03:58:14. Done. Ready. Waiting. The listener now knows. It was already deployed. Day 11,315. Breluv arrived at the Tier 6 registry desk at the standard time. The ledger was there as it always was. Gray board cover. Tier 6 classification seal stamped into the spine. The lower right corner worn to bare board, smooth in one specific spot. She picked it up, she signed it, name in the second column, date in the third. Then she set it down, then she picked it up again. She walked to the Tier 6 arc. She did not sit down. I was in the gallery. I had arrived early. I had my notebook open, pen in hand, the way I always did. I watched her stand at the Tier 6 seating with the ledger under her arm. I watched her look at the acoustic integration membrane, the curved transparent panel, catching the chamber's overhead light, slightly distorting the view of the floor behind it. I watched her look at it for approximately 4 seconds. Then she walked past it. She walked past the acoustic baffle, past the Tier 5 arc, past Tier 4. The chamber's ambient sound shifted as she moved, voices carried differently at each level, the acoustic architecture doing what it was designed to do, and then at some point past Tier 3 it was doing nothing, because she had crossed into the primary resonance zone. Her footsteps were audible, her presence registered on the floor sensors. Every species representative in the room turned, one by one, in the particular slow way that attention turns when something is happening that has no category yet. Vrathkel Dunnhausen looked up from the session manifest. His throat sac was bright. It had been bright all morning, routine proceedings, standard approvals, the kind of session the first adjudicant had conducted 10,000 times. It was the color of ordinary authority. Breluv walked to the adjudicant's table. She set the ledger on it, open to page 1. She set a second document beside it, the filing receipt, timestamp 0407, simultaneous submission to 11 galactic legal bodies, transmitted 3 minutes ago while she was still in the Tier 6 seating area before she stood up, because the filing did not require her to stand at the center of the floor. She had already filed. She was here for the record. She placed both hands flat on the table. 31 years of attendance. 31 years of good faith participation, 31 years of recorded acknowledgement. The compact, she said, has received 31 years of voluntary good faith participation from the Terran delegation, documented in the ledger now before you as Exhibit 1 of filing reference 2089 GLS Terran, submitted this morning to 11 galactic legal bodies under the species standing recognition instrument of 2089. She did not raise her voice. The primary resonance zone carried it without help. The compact has also received, in the same period, 4,400 documented territorial violations affecting 13 coalition species, analyzed under the compact's own founding charter methodology, submitted as Exhibits 2 through 1,848. The filing is complete. The record is 31 years long. I am noting this session for the record. Vrathkel Dunnhausen's throat sac went dim. Not gradually, not in stages. It went dim the way a light goes out when the connection is broken, present, then not present, and the absence more noticeable than the presence had been. At 0411 the relay opened. The carrier wave was the same frequency as the decree, the same infrastructure, the same 14,000 systems. Taver Callan's voice was steady and clear. The voice of someone who had been certain in technical execution for 7 years and was certain now. The names began. Not a declaration, not a battle, not a single ship moved. 4,400 violations read in order. The systems, the stations, the settlements, the individual names where the record could recover them. Each name transmitted on the relay that had carried the decree to 14,000 systems, running on the same infrastructure, in the same format, to the same reach. I was in the gallery. I wrote one word in my notebook. My secondary eyelid flushed amber. I felt it happen 3 seconds, maybe 4, the membrane dropping across my primary and staying there and then receding. In 61 years, it had happened twice. I had been saving the second one for something I could not yet name when I started saving it. I knew now what I had been saving it for. The broadcast was running. The names were still going. It would run for 11 hours and 14 minutes, and the last name on it had not been read yet, and no one in the chamber knew whose it was. Breluv was not in the chamber when the last name was read. She had left. Not immediately. She stood at the adjudicant's table until the session was formally suspended, which took 11 minutes, and then she walked back through the chamber the same way she had come, past Tier 3, past Tier 4, past the acoustic integration membrane, back through the Tier 6 arc, down the step to the Tier 6 exit corridor, 1.8 meters below the main floor level. She climbed the step up to the general concourse on the other side. She had done it 1,848 times. She took the transit to Mombasa and went to the bureau office. Voss was there. He had made tea. He was sitting at his own desk, not at the head table, and there was a second cup waiting at the desk beside his. She sat down. She picked up the cup. She drank the tea, which was not the lower quality Tier 6 blend from the deliberative service stations. It was the good kind. Voss had found the good kind eventually. On the cork board on the east wall, the photograph of Mevin Station was still there. Ordinary transit hub, full capacity, 6 hours before. The relay feed from Gavathul was audible from the transit concourse outside. Not clearly, not individually, just the sound of names at a distance. The way traffic sounds like traffic without each vehicle being separate. Voss did not say anything. He did not need to. He had found the name in the archive 8 months ago, the way you find something when you have been looking for it for a long time and you finally run the right search. He had included it in the broadcast without asking, because asking would have required a conversation that Breluv had never had in 31 years, and he was not going to make her have it at year 31 for permission. The broadcast ran 11 hours and 14 minutes. The last name was a Devon Breluv, age 9, Mevin Station. The Compact's review panel convened 6 days later. The findings were valid, all of them. The 2089 instrument was real, co-signed by the Compact, entered into the record, in force without interruption for 137 years. The routing exception was valid. The simultaneous 11-body submission was valid. The economic analyses were valid under the Compact's own methodology. The same methodology, the same numbers, applied in the direction no one had thought to apply them. First, adjudicant Vrathkel Dunason challenged the filing on procedural grounds. The challenge was reviewed, evaluated, and rejected on each of the 4 points he raised, using language drawn from the founding charter, the same founding charter he had been applying for 44 years. The review panel noted in the formal record that the routing requirement did not apply. The note was dry, 2 sentences, the kind of institutional language that means more than it sounds like it means. 19 days after the filing, the Compact's governing council convened under the founding charter's internal review provisions. The charter had a consumer protection clause, written 180 years ago to explain why Tier 6 species needed Compact oversight for their own good, to protect them from the consequences of their own limited governance capacity. The clause also specified the conditions under which that oversight could be challenged by member species, if the oversight authority was itself found to be acting in violation of founding principles. Vrathkel Dunason was removed from his position under that clause, not by opposition, not by vote from outside, by his own council using his own charter, under a provision he had approved and renewed and cited 44 times in 44 years of continuous tenure. He did not appear at the session. His absence was noted in the record. He was not defeated. He was not confronted. He was left behind by the architecture he had built, which had held his weight for 44 years and had now, quietly, decided it was done. The ledger entered Subregistry Level 9 as Exhibit 1 of Filing Reference 2089, GLS Terran. It is accessible to any Compact member species representative who submits a standard archive request. Several have. The first batch came from other Tier 6 species, 3 from species that had been classified at that level for longer than humanity had been in contact with the Compact. Some of them asked about the worn corner. The archive clerk told them, 31 years of the same grip, 3 fingers underneath the spine, thumb on the lower right corner. Some of them picked it up the same way, not all of them, but some, 3 fingers underneath, thumb on the worn corner, just to feel what 31 years feels like in the hand. Petra Ondesvel took the photograph down from the cork board on the day the filing was confirmed. She did not frame it. She did not put it in a case. She folded it carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. Her sister had asked for it back. Same thing, she said when Calland asked. Different board. She did not explain what she meant. She did not need to. The Compact's graduated sovereignty framework is under formal review. It has been since the filing. 11 other instruments from the 2089-2103 period are currently in analysis. 7 of them have implications for species currently sitting in the outer arcs of the deliberative floor. I wrote that in my own record, and then I closed my notebook. In the Mombasa transit market, 3 weeks after the filing was confirmed, Taver Callan bought too much bread. This happens to him regularly. He has a tendency to overbuy at markets, which he has never explained and which nobody has asked about. He was sitting at the outside tables with an Ovith remnant delegate, a woman named Sivith who had been assigned to the Mombasa Coordination Office while the compact's review process ran. She did not eat bread. He knew this. He bought it anyway because he had too much, and he offered some across the table, and she looked at it for a moment. She took a piece. They ate in the quiet. Neither of them said anything worth recording. Outside, past the market's open side, the relay feeds were still running, the follow-on broadcasts, the confirmation signals, the ordinary traffic of a legal process that had just become 11 other legal processes. The sound was not dramatic. It was just there, the way background sound is there when something has settled into the world and stopped being an event and started being a fact. The bread was good. It was the kind from the market's back stall, the one with the dark crust.